Toy Story 4 is a bad movie. It's not the worst movie ever made. I mean, it's far from the worst Pixar movie, and it's not even the worst film of 2019. I mean, it even has some of the most impressive animation of all time, like it's even frightening. Even though this looks like the most expensive movie of the 2010s, it fails to give the franchise the send-off it deserves. It basically has nothing going on under the hood. In fact, it just gets worse the more you dissect it. This is frustrating because it's the complete opposite of the previous three entries. Each one had substantial messaging that helped build upon the characters and the story. So why does 4 fail where the others succeed? To explain that, I need to go through what made the previous 3 films so good. Before we get to Toy Story 4, let's start with Toy Story 1. Toy Story 1 is a classic. It has iconic characters, iconic music, and an iconic cast. It's a genius film on multiple levels. It's so genius, in fact, that Pixar has been using it as the blueprint for nearly all of their films for the past 30 years. While it doesn't make a literal sense why the toys are alive, it at least makes thematic sense. The whole point of kids' toys is that you pretend that they're alive while you play with them. They're designed to be personified. Toy! With it being the first ever feature-length computer animated film, it takes the opportunity to be a metaphor for itself. The new, shiny, high-tech space toy threatens to replace the old, outdated cowboy toy. The cowboy is even associated with Western films, a genre that was once popular but has since fallen out of style. Westerns are typically set in the past, whereas sci-fi films, which is what Buzz is associated with, are typically set in the future. There are numerous other ways in which Woody and Buzz contrast with each other from a design standpoint. Buzz is more colourful, whereas Woody has more earthy tones. Buzz has a more articulate, sophisticated design with various materials and parts, whereas Woody has a more simple, basic design. Buzz has more elaborate features, while Woody only really has his pull-string voice box, which is even outdated compared to Buzz's. The film ends with both Woody and Buzz learning to coexist, showing how there can always be room for tradition and progress. It's a really great message. Toy Story also emphasizes the importance of a toy's role in both Andy's and the audience's life. Toys help promote imagination and creativity, so the film links them to a happy childhood. This is contrasted by Sid, the antagonist of the film, who destroys his toys. Aside from being mean to his sister and having some violent tendencies, Sid isn't really doing anything wrong. There's nothing wrong with destroying toys. In fact, it promotes its own form of imagination and creativity. But, from the toy's perspective, Sid is evil because what he is doing is destructive, perverted, and sadistic. Now, there are a lot of questionable implications surrounding this line of thought, which I'm not going to get into, but all I'll say is that the film's message is massively oversimplified and boils down to this. Andy takes care of his toys, so he deserves happiness. Sid doesn't take care of his toys, so he deserves to be traumatized for life.
What the fucking nut?
This links back to the role of the toys. They're there to serve Andy. The movie doesn't just end with Woody and Buzz returning home safe, it ends with them returning home to Andy. And that's the gist of Toy Story 1. It's not a perfect film, but it absolutely deserves its place in film history. Aside from being a metaphor for itself, the most important thing about this film is that even the toys know that they brighten Andy's childhood and make it their purpose in life to do so. Next is Toy Story 2, which is one of the greatest animated films ever made. It improves upon the original in every way. The animation quality is much better, the characters are more fleshed out, the jokes are genuinely hilarious, and I think it's one of the best written comedies out there.
I can't believe I have to drive all the way to work on a Saturday! All the way to work!
Al, the toy collector, is probably the best Pixar antagonist. I mean, just fucking look at him. Voice casting Wayne Knight is just perfection. This film sees the franchise head down a more existential path. The plot kicks off when Woody's arm rips, reminding him that he's not going to last forever. The toys are intrinsically linked to a single stage of a person's life being their childhood. Being a person, creature, conscious being that is intrinsically linked to a single fleeting stage of a person's life. It doesn't hold back, and it dives headfirst into exploring the character's purpose in life and the inevitability of their own death. The plot of the film is that Woody is kidnapped by Al the toy collector and is about to be shipped off to Japan because he's a rare collector's item, and therefore he will be in a museum and he will be maintained and taken care of along with Jesse, Bullseye and the Prospector, but it would mean that he would miss out on Andy's childhood. At the end of the film, Woody chooses to return to Andy, knowing that being a temporary yet meaningful part of his life will mean more than existing in a state of indifferent, unloved immortality. I don't know about you, but that's what Neon Genesis Evangelion is about, I think. The movie ends with the characters acknowledging the inevitability of Andy growing up, and by extension, the inevitability of them being discarded, essentially their own deaths.
When it all ends, I'll have old Buzz Lightyear to keep me company. For infinity and beyond.
But they're at peace with it because they know that they'll lead a life worth living. A lot of these ideas are viewed through Jessie, since she's the character who has been abandoned after her owner grew up. The trauma of this character is extremely affecting, making her probably the most emotionally resonant character in all of Pixar's filmography. The way her backstory is told might honestly be the best thing Pixar has ever done. What makes this sequence so great is that it's told through song, which maximizes its impact. It would not be the same if it were just Jessie verbally recounting what happened. It is absolutely devastating, not just because the character is discarded by someone who once cared about her, but because it's something that everyone has to go through. Everyone has to give up their childhood toys eventually, it's just a part of life. Younger audiences will see this and be cautioned about how they will transform as they get older, and older audiences will be reminded of the part of their life that they had to move on from. It's a potent reminder that everything in life is temporary, including life itself. The things that once brought you joy might not mean anything to you in a number of years. Life is fleeting, so enjoy it while it lasts. Toy Story 3 is fine, it's okay, it's alright, it's the most middle of the road, average, okay, decent, passable film imaginable. As with every subsequent entry of this franchise, the animation becomes noticeably better. However, this is the type of sequel that makes Toy Story 2 stand out in the first place. They just do the same shtick again. This film heavily borrows from the previous two films to the point where it becomes tedious. The plot mostly progresses through frustrating conveniences, plus the level of joke writing is a serious downgrade. I cannot emphasize this enough, but Spanish Buzz is not funny.
Bitácora Espacial.
I was like 12 years old when I first saw this, and I remember feeling emotional during the film's climax. Now that I'm over twice the age I was when I first saw it, that scene comes across as a bit cynically manipulative. Putting everyone's favourite innocent childhood characters into an industrial furnace is like shooting fish in a barrel. Like, oh yeah, of course I'm going to be upset if like my favourite characters are going to be destroyed violently in front of me. Even though this film is kind of derivative and contrived, what it absolutely gets right is the ending. The way this film ends is genius. Since there's an 11-year gap between this and the previous film, the people who have seen Toy Story 1 and 2 as kids would have been around the college-going age by the time this film came out. Just like how the toys were a major part of Andy's childhood, those same characters were likely a part of a lot of other people's childhoods too. When Andy gives his final goodbye to his toys, the audience in turn is saying goodbye to the franchise. However, for some people, they would have been bidding farewell to the characters they grew up with. This film's ending marks the beginning of adulthood, both for Andy and for the series' original audience. It's the most perfect, relatable, and cathartic way this film could have ended, and more than makes up for how lackluster much of it is. What a great ending to a beloved trilogy. You know what would suck? If they made a fourth film. And so after ending the franchise on such a perfect, bittersweet, moving note, 9 years later, Pixar comes along and makes Toy Story 4. The fact that this movie even exists completely undermines the whole point of the previous 3 films. Part of what made Toy Story 3's ending so affecting was that we were never going to see these characters again. Bringing them all back for another film feels extremely cynical and greedy. It's immediately obvious that they're only doing it for the money. There's nothing left to explore with these characters, so you can see the writers visibly struggle here. Let's just go through each main character and see what their journey is through Toy Story 4. He doesn't receive any attention from Bonnie, so he feels uncertain of his purpose. He sort of acts as a mentor for Forky, but his major character arc revolves around his relationship with Bo Peep. She's now a drifter, kind of. She just runs around and sometimes gets played with by some random kids in an unsupervised sandbox. She's mostly there to aid Woody, while also acting as a temptation for another way of life. Buzz now struggles with finding his inner voice. He now doubts himself, resulting in him listening to his literal voice box for guidance. This is played for laughs because his voice box just plays random pre-recorded phrases and doesn't offer any actual advice.
My name is Jeff.
But it coincidentally works out for Buzz anyway. Aside from being even less funny than Spanish Buzz, this completely goes against his character. He has always been a confident, brave leader figure, especially in Toy Story 2. So to see him suddenly doubt himself feels like we're watching an entirely different character. Plus, Buzz's first character arc is learning that he can't fly and that his laser is just a blinking light. Why does he suddenly no longer understand how his voice box works? She's just there. She indirectly affects the plot by being Bonnie's favourite toy. But that's it. She basically has no screen time. I kinda like Forky. The idea of a toy being forced into existence is both funny and kind of unsettling. I just wish they actually did something with that concept. Forky's whole character is that he's a bunch of junk brought to life after being made into a toy by Bonnie. He thinks that he's trash and keeps trying to discard himself. As mentioned before, it's Woody's job to keep Forky safe so that Bonnie stays happy. It's sort of a retread of Woody and Buzz's relationship in Toy Story 1, and Forky comes to the realization that he's a toy fairly quickly, so it doesn't really cover anything new. It could have, but it didn't. Forky is ironically discarded for the rest of the movie and doesn't do much and is basically forgotten about by the end. You can forget about everyone else because it seems like the film wants you to anyway. Slinky, Rex, Ham, the Potato Heads, and Bullseye barely have any screen time and don't affect the plot at all. They just hang in the background and might make a remark from time to time. I just want to make it clear, it's not like I'm a Rex super fan and need to see him in action to be happy. My point is that there's nothing for these characters to do that they haven't already done. Buzz Lightyear barely has anything to do, so what could they possibly do with Slinky? It's a reminder of how empty this thing is, and how this franchise should have ended 9 years prior. Believe me, these guys are at least there. Some characters didn't even make the cut.
Mr. Prickle Pants.
The Peas, Totoro, Chuckles the Clown, and the Pizza Planet aliens aren't even in this. Yeah, the Peas and Totoro can fuck off, who cares? But Chuckles and the Pizza Planet aliens were critical characters in Toy Story 3, so it's telling how exhausted this franchise is that they can't even make use of them. I can't even think what Pixar could have done with them. Like, the only option I can think of is to not make a 4th film at all. All these characters get squeezed out to make room for new characters, making it obvious that this film is just trying to capitalize off of the merchandise. It's just nothing. You're not just watching the characters try to find purpose, you're just watching the writers too. Like, there's just no substance in this at all. It's so flat and shallow. I feel like a lot of this could have been forgiven if the joke writing was actually good, but it's not. Duke Kaboom is just a lazy Keanu Reeves shove-in for Reddit, and the Duck and Rabbit, voiced by Key and Peele, is just annoying, and their jokes are insanely repetitive. Key and Peele are funny outside of this, and it's not their fault, it's just that they were given very obnoxious characters to play. So we have a movie that betrays its own franchise by existing, and struggles to justify it by having the characters go on extremely shallow arcs, or sometimes do nothing at all. I can imagine that some people will rush to defend the ending. After all, it's the big emotional climax that even brought Tom Hanks himself to tears. Now, bear in mind, Toy Story 3 had the best ending any franchise could hope for. So Toy Story 4 had to up the ante. They had to outdo the most perfect ending. Here's a quick recap of the plot to get up to speed. Woody gets no attention from Bonnie and feels that he no longer serves a purpose. He goes and meets Bo Peep at a fairground by chance, and I forgot about Gabby Gabby. Yeah, look, listen, Gabby Gabby doesn't matter. Woody meets up with Bo Peep, and he's tempted by the life that she lives, and is kind of fascinated by it, and is, because they have like a kind of a romance thing that going on, even though it was kind of secondary in the previous films. He's kind of tempted by it, and he's kind of torn between going back to Bonnie or staying with Bo Peep. And as Bonnie's RV drives away, Woody makes the decision to stay with Bo Peep, parting ways with Buzz and the gang in a big emotional goodbye. Woody lives happily ever after with Bo and being a lost toy, and the gang live on with Bonnie. The end. This ending pisses me off so much. First of all, this is just the ending of Toy Story 2 but reversed. It's a very similar dilemma, but now Woody chooses the other, less noble option. Comparing the two endings, it makes Woody seem like a selfish asshole now. He doesn't give a fuck anymore. He doesn't care about the kid. It's no longer about making the kid happy. It's about making Woody happy now all of a sudden. The ending was clearly made to one-up Toy Story 3, but the biggest problem of many is that Toy Story 3 worked so well because it reflects the viewer's childhood and the inevitability of growing up. There's no child or human character involved in this ending. It's not done for the human child, it's done for the toys, so there's no longer a relatability factor going on here. In what point in your life did your toys part ways so that they could go do parkour in a fairground? It's such a forced, try-hard, unearned, inorganic and manipulative attempt at a tearjerk ending. Everything about Toy Story 4 is just fundamentally broken. All the characters and themes have been thoroughly explored by the previous 3 films, forcing the writers to either discard or betray the characters that made the franchise iconic in the first place. I don't know what could have been done differently to improve this, because the best solution that I can think of is to just not make it in the first place. The fact that this exists at all completely undermines the integrity of the franchise and Pixar as a whole. Toy Story 3 is no longer the big emotional goodbye that it was meant to be. Now this is, and that pisses me off because we were robbed of something special. This won't even be the franchise's finale for long because Toy Story 5 is on the conveyor belt. Pixar, just stop. Toy Story 3 wasn't just the ending of the Toy Story franchise. It marked the end of the golden age of Pixar. From the 2010s onwards, Pixar became more focused on sequels and formulated ideas. It's almost been 30 years since Pixar's first film, so 2010 marks the company's halfway point. Comparing the first half of their run, the golden age, to the second half is like night and day. Pixar needs to experiment, and by that I mean they should take risks. Even though Lightyear is much worse than Toy Story 4, it's at least something different, even if it is itself a bigger failure. I just want something new. Slow down with the sequels because most of them are unnecessary. They should also try to just break the formula. As I said before, they're just copying the formula that was established by Toy Story 1, and it just doesn't translate well to other premises. I've always said that I would have enjoyed Soul so much more if it were just about a jazz pianist living in New York City, with none of that afterlife bullshit. Give the whole secret world humans don't know about shtick a break. I don't know. I don't think Pixar shows any signs of changing things up, and they'll likely just stay in this comfort zone till it stops making money. Despite Toy Story 3's ending, Pixar just doesn't want to move on.